Hello old friend, look at you, the Sega Dreamcast controller. And if I can say one thing about this controller, it's imaginative. It looks like it was conceived in somebody's dream. It's just a very odd design. It looks like a speedboat. It's got a giant circle and everything sort of stems out from the side, and we have little grippy speedboat-like things here and triggers. We've seen those come back in another popular game console. And of course, one of the most unique features of this game controller, the Vmu Screen. Look at that thing. You can pull that out right here. And that's your little Sega Dreamcast VMU, which is basically like a glorified memory card that would save all of your game information and also put little LCD pictures up on screen. Without the VMU, you can look right through your controller. It's just a big gaping hole there that looks like it needs to be filled with the VMU. There's another slot here for the Sega Dreamcast Rumble Pack, which I no longer have. Actually, I have no idea where it went. Doesn't matter, I don't really care for it anyway. And you can see here they gave you a little design cue that you can take your controller wire and put it up there. Locks it in place if you want it out of your way down here. You don't want a wire hanging down, you can put it up there and it comes out the top of the controller. That was nice of them to do that. Doesn't this just look like a boat? Am I the only one that thinks this? All of the familiar video game controller elements are here. We have an analog thumbstick, which has a little textured grip-like surface on it so your thumb doesn't go flying off of it. But it kind of does anyway because it's made of a really hard plastic, which in my opinion doesn't really work all that well. I don't actually like this at all. However, we have a digital pad here, which is what I normally use for playing video games on my Dreamcast, which although not perfect, it's also a little slippery, made of a very hard plastic. It's slightly textured but not enough to really keep your thumb in place. Remember how that Sega Genesis controller I showed, your thumb sat down into it and it just wouldn't move? Well, they lost that with this, and your thumb can easily slide off of this thing, but it's not bad, it is functional. Over here we have the trademark 4 buttons, and you know, it looks a little similar to something. Well, take a look at the Xbox 360 controller here. Not identical. I see they've changed the colors a little bit. Oh, look at that. Triggers. Let's take a look at the back of these things. The Sega Dreamcast controller versus the Xbox 360 controller. And you can see obviously the 360 controller, they added in some more buttons and it's generally more compact. The Sega Dreamcast controller is gigantic. And although they're somewhat similar size if you hold them on top of each other, this controller feels just enormous. It's like you're holding an entire game system in your hand when you're playing the Dreamcast. This thing is almost as big as the Dreamcast. I've never been an enormous fan of the controller, and I think the main reason is that one, it is just a strange shape. It's not totally uncomfortable, but it's made of a very hard plastic. And all of the buttons and everything, they feel slippery. Your fingers just slide off of it easily. It just doesn't feel as solid as the Sega Genesis controllers they put out a decade earlier. I think they put more focus on the LCD screen than they did the actual design of the controller. And you can see the little start button here. Triggers work in a similar way to the Xbox 360 controller for driving games like Sega Rally 2 or something. You squeeze that down, then you have the difficult chore of steering with your thumb slipping off this thing while trying to brake at the same time, and it's a little frustrating. I think one of the key selling points with the Dreamcast was this visual memory unit. And if you start your Dreamcast up and it makes a really obnoxious screeching beeping noise, that's because this thing is out of batteries. And you can look on the back here and it tells you what kind of batteries to get. You can easily replace them, buy them at Radio Shack. It takes 2 of them, and they're about $5 a piece at Radio Shack, and very easy to replace. You might be able to find them cheaper somewhere else. But once you replace your batteries, this thing does work out of the Dreamcast unit itself, and you can supposedly play little video games on here. But why would you play video games on here when you could just play them in your Sega Dreamcast on your television. Seriously. I don't know. This came out before cell phones were everywhere in the world, so maybe they were just slightly ahead of their time, but I don't even think I have any games in here, so whatever. And it gives you a bunch of cryptic numbers and stuff. Apparently it's the end of time right now. Wow, I better finish this review. Even if you have one of these things and it's out of batteries, it will still save games while you're playing the Sega Dreamcast. So you don't have to worry about necessarily replacing the batteries unless you're sick of hearing that screeching beeping sound. This is the plug for the Sega Dreamcast controller, and for whatever reason I've always liked this. I thought it was simple and easy to plug into your Dreamcast. They give you a lot of wire, which is good, so you don't have to have your Dreamcast sitting right next to your controller. And of course the very familiar little swirly Sega Dreamcast logo. So if the date 9/9/99 means anything to you, well, you probably already have a few of these. Here's the front of the Sega Dreamcast, and you can see they give you 4 controller ports. The controller easily fits right into there. And you can have a great 4-player game of games like Chu Chu Rocket with this thing. You didn't have to buy any sort of additional multi-tap. When you insert your game disc and start the Sega Dreamcast, each game gives you a neat little opening screen. Some of them are more creative than others, like this one for Chu Chu Rocket, which is my favorite. And this is, I think, the coolest part of the Sega Dreamcast controller. Even if it doesn't do anything, it shows that they had a lot of great ideas for the Sega Dreamcast. I think that, sadly, Sega failed to execute them as well as they could. And of course, it's got to be a hard job launching a game console across the world to begin with and compete against the Sony PlayStation 2. So, I know there's a lot of people out there that love the Dreamcast and the Dreamcast controller. And this is one of the reasons. I mean, nobody else did this. I mean, it's like if you forget what game you're playing, you can just look on the screen on your controller and it reminds you. If for some reason you don't want to look at the screen that you're playing the video game on. Each game on the Dreamcast had its own unique little design on the screen, and it was always fun to see what they'd come up with. Sometimes it would actually change when you did something. We'll start Test Drive Le Mans here, and a little car comes up that says, OK. Somebody's not happy about the discontinuation of the Dreamcast. Growling won't help. You actually have to write a letter to Sega.